Hey there, welcome back. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. As you probably noticed from the thumbnail, I'm building a display base, a diorama display base for my scratch-built space cube, which is a stasis cube used for deep space travel. Put whatever you want in there, and it comes out the same way it went in. As you can see, I've got a little bit of a head start. I've got the base already cut and the back glued together. And if you want to see where I got to this point in the build, I built myself a hot wire foam cutter so I could build this project, because a big old kitchen knife was just making a big old mess. Once I had everything about where I wanted it, I took the foam cutter and carved out some contours a little bit, and just kind of accentuated the details that were already there, and just to make them, it's got to look natural. So to do this, it's not random. You want it to look actually, you don't want it to look random. You want it to look like that's the way it's supposed to be. As things weather and erode and wind blows and water flows, you get different patterns, and these are somewhat predictable as to what they'll look like once they're done that. I mean, small scale would be like, a ditch beside your yard, and then a large scale you would get like the Grand Canyon. Of the adhesives I have, hot glue seems to work the best on this foam. It takes a second to set up, because if it's it has an insulated value, but it's working really well. It sticks there and it stays. It's not coming off. I've not had to use any extra fasteners or pins or anything to hold anything in place. My vision for this base is going to be a canyon wall. There will be some stratification in the, you'll be able to put layers like you would find in the Grand Canyon or up in parts of Utah. Not having actually traveled to that part of the world yet, the best way to find reference material was, internet. Go look for, canyon walls. So I looked at different places like, Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, and Death Valley, and just look through the images and say, hey, this is, I like that, I don't like this, that looks good, I'm gonna borrow that element from this one and tweak that one. The offcuts from the wire cutter is excellent for this. They're sort of fitting right into place. If you look at the canyon wall, as things fall off the wall, they'll collect at the bottom. You'll get dust and pebbles and rocks and boulders as the cliff face degrades and weathers away. This is where the fun starts. Not that it hasn't been fun already. It's just, this is kind of the part I was looking forward to, is actually carving into the foam and creating that stratified look of the canyon wall. Being kind of new to this material, it did take me a few minutes of chopping into it and poking at it and pulling on it to kind of get a feel for what it's going to take to mold it and carve it into the shapes that I want it to go. So along with the blade, we got out some needle nose pliers, a stiff brush that I had, and used both ends of that, and just kept poking at it and pulling on it until I was starting to see the where I wanted to go with it. So now I'm thinking texture. We want to put some texture into the foam, and I mean, this stuff is actually pretty stiff, and it didn't take the texturing too well, so ended up just using that bigger rock there and just punching it with it, and just punching it and just making divots and whatnot, just knowing that I'm gonna have to smooth those out with some terrain paste. With sort of a basic understanding of geological processes, you have to, there's some assumptions you need to make that the weathering patterns you see in nature around us is also going to be happening out in the universe. So if there's a planet out there that would be habitable, then it's gonna have geology, and you're gonna recognize it. As I mentioned, the inspiration for this diorama is the canyon walls that you would find out west. In particular, those you would see like in northern Arizona and southern Utah. So, for the sake of the diorama, you've landed on an alien planet. Your stasis cube is dropped into the middle of a desert area, and you're looking at the surroundings, and you're seeing the geology, and you go, that is weathering. That's either by wind or water, and you can see how the layer sediment has been stratified as it's laid down. So to recreate that effect, we've gouged a big trench down the side of the back, and then I'm going to take a torch and smooth everything out, because nature abhors right angles. You don't find them very often. This is something you want to be really careful with. You can take this too far in a hurry, so be prepared. Make sure you've got a fire extinguisher handy, and you're wearing a proper PPE, so you've got a mask on, and so in case you create fumes, you don't want to be breathing this stuff. So you're going to go slow. I look at what I'm doing as layering. So I'm layering the effects. In some cases, you're adding material to a layer, or in some cases, you're subtracting material from a layer. I find this helps me get into and maintain that flow state. So you're not trying to complete all of one task before moving on to the next. You're allowing it to just flow. I find this gets my creative juices flowing a little better, and it's more fun that way. So again, this is a hobby. So if you're not having fun, what's the point? So I've got the foam structure about where I want it, and we're gonna moving on to the next layer. So you've got a canyon wall, and the canyon wall is made up of dirt and rocks. So the rocks are going to fall out, and they're going to land at the base of the wall, and they're going to be just scattered about. So got some rocks right out of the landscape, and we're gluing them, and I'm gluing them on in somewhat of a random pattern. Again, you're looking at the way things would weather. So it's going to be, the bigger rocks are going to fall farther away. Some of the smaller ones are going to stay up on the ledge. So once I had all those glued down, I put the model back on there to check, to make sure vision and reality are matching up, and did this frequently throughout the whole build. So now to the next process that I was looking most forward to is terrain paste. The recipe is directly from Boileye Hobby Time, except I'm using Elmer's Glue All instead of Mod Podge, because I don't have Mod Podge, and they're both PVA, so a little extra water should make that work just fine. Then a little sand and craft paint, and stir it up, and you've got terrain paste. The brown was a little dark, so a big squirt of yellow, and it lightened it up quite a bit. And the reason for that is I'm going to prime it, or the plan was to prime it black, but that got interrupted a little bit due to weather. One thing I noticed about the terrain paste was in the brush I was using, the plaster was building up in the bristles, creating a big blob, and keeping the terrain paste from flowing onto the foam evenly. So I had to periodically stop and clean that out. See if we can figure out a better way of doing that in the future. As wind and water work on eroding the canyon wall, gravity is going to pull that stuff right down to the base, and it's going to collect there. So we'll put down a base of glue, of good old Elmer's, and cover that with sand. So, just use your imagination and kind of put the glue where you think the sand would fall, and then work it in with the brush, and then wet the whole thing down with some isopropyl alcohol just to kind of lock it all in place. I talk a lot about using your imagination, and It's and you can come up with some fantastic things all on your own. But if you're looking for a particular outcome, you need to kind of prime your imagination with knowledge. And with that in mind, I spent probably a good hour looking through the photos on the internet to find the thing that were. It wasn't just one image either. So you looked at a bunch of things and take a little bit from each one in order to kind of build up the picture in your mind of the thing you want to make in front of you. As I mentioned previously, the idea was to prime this thing black, but I only have black primer in rattle can, so you need to do that outside, and we were suddenly in the middle of a mini monsoon season, because it had rained pretty much straight for like 3 days straight. So got out my good old trusty Iwata SAR. It's a single action siphon feed. You can put a huge bottle on the bottom of this thing. You can spray a lot of paint over a large area in a short period of time, and this thing is perfect for priming these larger projects. So here I'm using the Vallejo primer. It's just the gray, and I wanted to darken it up, so I added a little bit of black to it as well, and it went on really well. And I'm liking actually didn't get it into every nook and cranny. I was kind of liking the way it made it look like I don't know. It was a neat look when I got done. Once I had the model sitting there on the prime surface, it became quickly evident that it was setting on the surface instead of in the environment. So that kind of destroys the scale of the thing. So I fiddled around and came up with these 1, 2, 3 blocks and just used them to compress the foam as much as it would compress. I put quite a bit of weight on this, and it didn't deflect very much at all, but it was enough that it would now sit in the environment instead of on the surface of the foam. Then a quick touch up with a little bit of primer, and then another test fit, and that's looking a lot better. This does commit you. I mean, I've got a big square dent in the desert floor there, so that's where it's going to go. After a little bit of mixing and fixing, I settled on the primary base color, which is just going to use craft paint for this, and running it through my old Frankenstein airbrush. Old absent-minded me, I keep forgetting to turn my little extraction fan on. This thing works. It's really nice for when you're doing small jobs. This was actually kind of an odd one, because the size of this thing, it wasn't going to work well in my big cardboard booth. So I'm just sort of going easy, trying to keep the overspray off of all my other tools and things. And the fan really helps with that when I remember to turn it on. Here's a quick pro tip. Anytime you're using craft paint in an airbrush, it is best to filter it, because there's junk in there. As I'm applying the colors, and this included the primer as well, I'm imagining the level of the sun, or the star in this case, to be at about 45 degrees from level. So everything's coming in at a bit of an angle, so you're going to get shades. At least on the screen right here, the sunshine's going to be coming from right to left. So I'm shading everything in that direction. Except when I flip it around, those will be reversed. As we're getting pretty close to bringing the base in for a landing here, I'm going to do a little dry brushing, and this is just to kind of highlight the texture and give it a little more light, if you will. So again, part of the look I'm going for here is there will be a light source, an imaginary light source, off to the left of your screen there. So you got to do a little bit of imaginary geometry. So as you're applying the colors, you're looking at, from the point of view of the light source, it's going to be lighter on this side of the object than it is on this side of the object. So when you're applying your texture, you really, you got to keep that in mind. Of all the things I was looking forward to working on this project, this is probably the biggest of the bunch. So I'm integrating the model into the diorama so that they look like they belong together. So when you first put it on there, there's just like this bright blue object in the middle of this desert. So it looks like it landed 5 minutes ago. So the best products I have for this are the Vallejo washes and pigment powders. So I started out mixing up a wash with the pigment powders, using a little bit of my acrylic thinner with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol in it, and then mixing up the pigment powder in that and running that through the airbrush to put down a dust coat, so it's dust accumulated over time is the look I'm going for there, and I think it worked really well. So as you're looking at the model, there are transitions here. This will be where a horizontal surface is transitioned to a vertical surface, and as such things are going to accumulate there. So I'm going in with some black wash and just darkening up around the areas where things would naturally accumulate. As I'm working on the weathering, I'm thinking in layers, because nature is not random. There are patterns everywhere, and as you get wind and rainfall and seasons and hot and cold, and there are predictable patterns as to how a environment will evolve over time, and that's what I'm trying to recreate. So along with the washes, I'm taking a wet brush and dipping it into the pigment powders, which is probably a model making sin, but I'm using that to apply a thicker coat of the pigment powders in certain areas where there's going to be even more accumulation. After a few more touch-ups and a little speed up time by using a hairdryer, I'm calling this one done, and I'm just tickled to death. I have had a ball building this thing. After I let everything dry for a good day or two, I took it out and gave it a quick shot of Rust-Oleum's dead flat clear polyurethane. It did mute the colors just a little bit, but I'm okay with the trade-off, because I'll be able to handle it now without those pigment powders coming off on my hands. And with that, man, thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I hope you had as much fun as I did. So there'll be a video on your screen here that YouTube thinks would be right up your alley, so give that a check. And with that, again, thank you so much, and go make something.